Hi, welcome everyone. I want to invite you to welcome with me my beautiful sister, my beautiful friend, Dr. Helane Wahbeh. And today, this is a free holistic channeling webinar, and I asked Helane to come here with us today because she is one of my colleagues who is also deeply passionate about channeling and has devoted her life to it, honestly, in the recent years, as well as many other things, as you'll hear from her bio. So, here is what I want you to know about her before we launch into talking about her book that was published in 2021, The Science of Channeling. So, Helane is the director of research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and she is the president of the Parapsychological Association. So, she was clinically trained as a naturopathic physician while also getting a master of clinical research. So, a lot of your life has been in research, and in particular in mind body medicine and complementary and alternative medicines. And when I met you, I know that you had a big background coming from Washington State, was it? Or Oregon? Oregon.
Oregon.
And you came down into the IONS campus in California with this big background in research in mind body medicine, and they put you to work and you became the director of research at IONS. So now, how long have you been with IONS now? Like 10 years? Or
Since 2015. So
yeah,
in about 8 years now. Amazing.
years. So your research there ended up kind of rolling into a focus on channeling, or that's what you're most known for. And you've written two books now. Your first one is about your background, your family background, which I'll have you talk about a little bit. And then this new book is all the research you've done on channeling through ions. And so I'd love to just have you start off with telling us how you went from kind of a research kind of background into such a passion and focus on channeling.
Thank you so much, Maria, for that lovely introduction. And it is such a pleasure for me to be here with you today, talking about my favorite topic that we both love so much. And yes, when you read my bio straight, it's like, what? There's a disconnect. Like, how did this person end up doing channeling? But what's not in my bio is that when I was 10 years old, I went to my first seance, and which happened to be at my grandparents' house. They called them meetings, where my uncle was trance channeling, and there was a group of 30 people, and these meetings happened weekly. So I was very immersed in this trance channeling. What I know now is a bit of a spiritualist type tradition. And that was my whole upbringing on my mother's side. And it's fascinating because my father's side was Orthodox Christian. So I'd go to church every Sunday and had Sunday school. And I also happened to go to Catholic school. And then I'd have these seances on the weekend. So it was a very eclectic upbringing. And that seance and those spiritualist type, that background completely affected my worldview about how I viewed reality, how I viewed myself. I felt on a deep soul level that I was more than my body, that my consciousness would survive, that I could have a relationship with non-physical beings and communicate with them, get information from them, that I was deeply guided by a spirit team that supported me. And it also validated my personal channeling experiences. So I was very, very sensitive as a young child to other people's emotions, to energy in the room. I would, often what I now feel was likely feel spirits in the room, and I would get all freaked out and I couldn't, be in the dark and like go around our spiral staircase without getting freaked out. I was very, very sensitive as a young child. Anyway, that spiritualist background really supported me on so many different levels. Now, this dissonance between my personal channeling background and my academic career was vast. And I basically kept that whole personal experience completely hidden. And, there were a few friends I would talk about it with, but not many. And of course, I talk about it within the family, but it wasn't something that I brought up in medical school or, at Oregon Health and Science University. I ended up doing all these incredible meditation studies, and my gifts were still there. I would, see things around the combat veterans when I was interviewing them about their post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic events. I would see all these things, but I could never like bring it to a lab meeting or introduce a research question that looked at anything beyond the materialistic or the physical. And I basically just resigned myself to the idea that, well, I'm living a double life, and that's just how it is, because the mainstream world isn't quite ready to hear about these things. So,
What
because,
was the what was the interest in going the research route for you? Like, did you have a thought at that time that one day I'm going to put this towards what I experienced growing up?
no, not at all. I mean, and I went to medical school to be a clinician. I wanted to help people. I was always very fascinated about health. I'm actually named after my great grandmother, who was a midwife and healer in Palestine. And everyone would say, "Oh, you're going to follow in her footsteps. You're going to become a doctor." I'd say, no, I'm not interested in that. But as I grow older, it was true. I had a deep passion and interest in how we heal, how our mind affects our health. And I was very excited to go down that path. And I got my naturopathic medical degree. I started my private practice. And I kept having this, intuition about delving more deeply into how things work, how this works. I did want to help people individually, but I wanted to make more of an impact in terms of understanding healing in general. So that's how I ended up getting into research, but never did I think I would research channeling. I actually had no clue that channeling research even existed. Now I know there's like 150 years of formal research that has been done on channeling in this field called parapsychology.
Right.
And I crazily am now the president of the Parapsychological Association, which I still am a bit surprised I ended up in that role, but it's incredible. There's this whole field that, hardly anybody knows about that's actually been rigorously studying channeling in all of its various forms. And of course, humanity's experienced channeling for, as long as we've ever recorded these types of things.
Shamanism.
No, I did not know that I was going to be here where, like, if you asked me 10, 15 years ago, oh, you're going to direct this research team on channeling, I'd be like, what? You're crazy.
Right. And here you are. Thank goodness. And so, what has been the most exciting part of your focus on channeling since you've been really kind of putting the research to it at IONS? What has been like the discoveries that have been like, oh my gosh, like really like this is why I was born?
Yes, that's amazing. In terms of impact and my kind of heart expansion with joy is when people understand how common these experiences are, and they feel like they're not alone anymore. They feel a sense of, oh, you've just like completely validated me. And that brings such joy to my life that I'm able to support people in understanding that this is not rare. it is likely not a mental health issue, and that you're not alone in experiencing it. It's actually incredibly common, and it's beautiful and unique and shows up in such a variety of ways for each person. And how do we love and honor that? So really, when you talk about discovery, um, that feels a little different. But what's been most meaningful for me is the emails I get from people over and over again saying, thank you. You have allowed me to feel empowered and connected about these experiences that I've had my whole life that I haven't been able to talk to anybody about.
Yes, exactly. I can relate to that as well. So many people just normalizing
Yeah.
something. And my languaging for it is about like initiating, not having initiation rights anymore into our abilities if you are at that sensitivity level. And so you're like an out of control medium or channel, you're an uninitiated shaman, just kind of this energy ball of abilities just bouncing, ping-ponging through the world with no context and no validation or outside or inside, right? And that can be so painful because,
Yeah.
as you know, and as I know, these gifts don't go away if you have them. They, in fact, they actually can start growing in you, right? So, what has been your journey personally with your gift?
So I mentioned, when I was younger, I was really quite sensitive, and stepping into the trance channeling experience in my family, I never thought that I had that trance channeling gift, if you will. But I had other experiences. It manifested for me in different ways in my life. Number one, I'm very visceral. So, let's say I'm talking to someone, they're discussing different options for themselves. I might get huge goosebumps and a very strong rush of energy when they're talking about one option versus the other. And to me, that's my signal. Go that way. That's where you need to go, is this kind of goosebump feeling. I
Mm-hmm.
also have received, for example, when I was in private practice, I would be working with my patient, I'd be taking a history, they'd mention a physical symptom, and then I would get this huge download of information, fully formed
Wow.
packet of information that instantaneously gave me all this detail about the origin of that physical symptom. And I would start asking them questions, and then they would just, start crying. It was usually some sort of stuck thing that needed to be released. So that was another way that it showed up for me. My ability to hear my guides has strengthened over my life. Often it's not like a hearing of actual words in linear time. It's like like hearing of a whole conversation at once. And sometimes I will hear words. So these are just little examples of my personal expression of my channeling abilities, and it shows up differently for everybody.
Yes.
Like some people really see, like they see colors, or they might see spirit. Other people dream, have precognitive dreams where they know the future, and they wake up and they're like, wow, I totally just dreamt about that last night. It just shows up in so many different ways. And so, when I started at Ions, I was very interested in trance channeling, understanding it, how does it work, what happens in the body, etc. But I had never personally experienced it. And synchronistically, I found out about this protocol by Patricio Tresoldi in Italy. Wonderful. Maria
Yeah.
knows him, and that taught naive people how to trance channel through this hypnosis process. And I got so excited. I said, I want to learn how to do that. And I did. I went through the process. And so now if I choose to, I can trance channel, and I've developed that ability as well. And so, I really hold the premise that channeling is our innate ability as humans, that everybody can channel, but that the way it shows up for them is unique to them. And that perhaps there's different factors that might indicate which type of channeling you might be stronger at than others, but that if you believe you can channel, that you believe in channeling, that anyone can learn how to channel and can learn different ways of channeling. I've talked to so many teachers who hold that if people believe that they can do it, that they can have some level of mastery of the specific types.
Yeah.
And I'll say one more thing, Maria, because the way I talk about channeling is a much broader definition than some people might be thinking about it. So I want to clarify that. So when I say channeling, I'm talking about this process of accessing information and energy from beyond our conventional notions of time and space that can appear receptive, but also expressive. So that's a big mouthful. It basically encompasses a spectrum of experiences, from intuitive gut hunches that just about everyone could say that they've had, all the way up to mediumship and trance channeling, and then everything in between, all these experiences that I've just described to you and more. So I hold that whole thing as channeling, various aspects of the same innate human capacity to access more than our physical selves, this kind of greater wisdom.
Yeah. We really are. It's part of our divine blueprint, right? It's just part of our anatomy, our energetic anatomy. Who knows? Like, we have this ability. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
thinking of all the medicine people and I've met throughout the years, and perhaps you have too, or you had your family. For me, I didn't have my family as an example, but I had, like, going at a young age to do ceremony with the Lakota, with the Hopi, and all these different tribes around the world throughout the decades. And all the doctors, all the medicine doctors are going into trance channeling to do the doctoring. And you read the books about shamanism. You read Mabel McKay's biography, by Greg Sarris, and you read, and there it is. They're going into states of trance channeling and receiving information, etc. But that's, as you said, that's one level of it. And then there's also just the gut intuitions and the, like, turn right, not left, etc. And what is that? Like, could you speak to what you've discovered through your research at IONS? Like, what have you found is the what's happening physiologically when people kind of, like, go from normal waking reality into a trance channeling state? Because that's fascinating to me. Brain
Yes.
waves, like, what's happening?
Yes, absolutely. So, if any of you have actually observed trance channeling or kind of a deeper type of channeling, it seems very clear that the person is not in their normal state. And what we've seen for most studies is that altered states of consciousness are conducive to channeling. And people get to those altered states in different ways. Some people meditate, some go out in nature, some use drumming or other ritual. There's various ways for people to get into an altered state, to be able to access this greater wisdom, if you will. Now, what we know about altered states of consciousness and physiology is that there are shifts in the brainwave. So in general, we see increased theta, which is a slower brainwave rhythm than our normal waking day. Now, when I started looking into the previous studies that have been done about physiology, I found it quite fascinating because there was such contradictory information. Because some studies actually showed, like, a heightened stimulation. So, like a more fight or flight hormone response. Whereas other studies showed a more relaxed and kind of meditative type physiological response. So, what we know definitively is that we don't know, that it likely depends on the type of channeling that the person is doing and the individual themselves. So I would love to be able to tell you, okay, when people trans channel, this is what happens, and this is the one thing. And we aren't seeing that. We're
Yeah.
seeing lots of different types of results. Now, there are more results that are showing increased theta and increased alpha, what you might see in the meditation literature. And one of our scientists, Arnaud Delorme, did a really fascinating study where he worked with mediums and he looked at their brain waves when they were giving responses to questions and sharing information about deceased people. And he looked at when they gave correct answers versus incorrect answers. And there was a unique signature when they were giving the correct answers versus the incorrect answers. It's called midline theta. So again, theta is showing its head again. So the other thing I want to share, because you were actually involved in this study, which was really fun. We did a very intensive study with multiple trance channelers, and we looked at brain waves, heart waves, skin conductance, and we also asked them to record their voice, reading a story when they were in a channeling state versus a non-channeling state. Now, these trance channelers went in and out of the channeling state like 6 times, and then we repeated it on a second day. So we had all this really wonderful data.
In the
And
Faraday cage.
I know.
Right.
You want to share about what that experience was like?
It was fun. It was really fun. A little bit intimidating at first, like for me personally, just like wanting to do it right, wanting to be, thank you for choosing me. I hope I don't mess up. But it was really amazing to be in the Faraday cage, which is made out of what? It's just steel or
It's steel, but it's meant to block electromagnetic fields so that there's no kind of interference from the EMF.
right. So they close you into that cube and with all of the pads on the scalp,
Yes.
and the other, the monitor on the fingertip, etc. And but I could still hear the technician outside ringing the bell, to begin to. And so it was interesting because it was like bell rings. It's like, okay, so now think about your grocery shopping or your to-do list, and just let your brain relax and wander. And then rings again, now go into meditation. Rings again, now go into channeling, right? And so it was interesting to kind of on cue, yeah, like tell myself to like, okay, now we're doing this. And when the helper would come in, they knew exactly what was happening. They knew what they were participating in and why. They were grateful to be part of it. It was fascinating. Yeah. And meeting
Yes.
your mom and meeting the other participants was like, it was really an amazing kind of point of my life, that study.
That's so wonderful to hear your experience of it. It was very joyful because everyone in the physical and the non-physical were really excited
Yeah,
about that study.
it was so cool.
It was so cool. And what's so, having witnessed so many trance channeling experiences, I was very biased researcher. I was like, of course we're going to see changes. Like, how could we not see changes between the two states? Because it's so very different. And what was fascinating is that we didn't. We actually did not see changes in the EEG between the channeling state and the non-channeling state. And this was looking at normal what's called frequency analysis, which is looking at the speed of the brain waves.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see any changes in the heart waves or in the skin. And I was like, what? I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. We did see a change in the voice recording. So we did a frequency analysis of the voice when they were reading the story during and reading it afterwards. And we actually, asked during channeling, why didn't we see anything? And the explanation was that, in order for the I don't know if I need to say supposed non-physical being here, but for them to blend with the channeler, there is an adjustment so that they can actually blend with them. So that's why there wasn't such a strong shift. But this is exciting news, Maria, because I haven't shared this with you yet. We always wanted to do a more complex analysis of the brain waves, and we finally finished that analysis and submitted that paper, and it was accepted for publication. And basically, instead of looking at just the frequency of the brain waves, we looked at the brain as a whole and how each aspect of the brain was talking to
Ooh.
others. So it's called a connectivity analysis, and it's a pretty cutting edge type of analysis. And what we found, which was really quite fascinating, is that there was less connectivity during the channeling compared to the mind wandering.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Wow.
So,
So
yeah, tell me how that makes sense to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, it makes sense to me because, when I link with the helpers, the first thing that they are doing is, um, in the linking, is clearing me. And so they'll clear, clear, clear all distraction. And when the link is very, very like pure and solid, and our consciousness unifies, and then my personality kind of just like really goes into the background, then my whole body, it's completely outside of time space. Like I have no, my forward kind of perception, like my most prominent perception is that, I'm in a timeless space, very focused, very clear. Any question that's asked, that a direct answer comes through just completely clear. Yeah, just no distraction, and it feels like it's all coming from this very light chamber inside my head. But of course, there are no walls to that chamber. It's just like the everythingness, like the great, like Akashic records, what have you. So
Mhm.
that is fascinating. Yeah, and hasn't there been like studies on deep meditation with Tibetan monks where they locate that in the deepest part of that meditation, the only active part of the brain is like this point right in the center of their head. That's not the pineal gland; it's this other point.
Oh, interesting. Yes, I haven't heard of that specific one, but we do know from psychedelic studies that, especially with psilocybin, they've done fMRI where they're looking at what's happening in the brain as it's happening. And so the participants are having incredibly vivid, complex visual, auditory, etc. experiences, but the blood flow in the brain is actually decreased. So it's really quite fascinating. The other thing we found in our study is that the deeper the subjective trance rating, so we asked everybody, how deep was your trance in this specific session? And they would rate that on a scale of 0 to 100. And we found that the deeper they rated the trance was related to the decrease in connectivity. So that kind of confirmed our finding, if you will. So we're really excited about that research because it was a bit disappointing to find no changes in the regular EEG analysis. And I
Sure.
think the more we use these more holistic, complex analysis techniques, it might be able to give us a different perspective. And, you know, when I first started doing channeling research, I naively thought, you know, I'm going to figure out how channeling works, and there's going to be just one way, and I'm just going to figure out what it is. And I quickly discovered that there's probably not just one way of channeling, and that there's many different ways that channeling works. And it likely depends on the type of channeling and the person themselves, how it actually functions. But I think this is,
Exactly.
yeah, it's exciting work, and we're definitely looking forward to continuing to move it forward.
What about, I remember one of the questions during that study, um, I think it was the last question that we were to answer in the post Faraday cage interview. And that was, oh, it was when the technician was actually talking to the embodied helper. And it was like, is there anything else we could add to this, process to track the differences? And I know that my helper was like, if you had some kind of tracking on neurotransmitters, you would see that there's, in certain people, of course, like there's a heightened, like, of the biochemistry of like joy and, rest, digest, like, like the person channeling, when it is this pure loving being, the whole body goes into like a relaxed state, goes into sometimes bliss, ecstatic states, um, etc. So that was interesting to me as well, and I wonder if you've ever done anything like that.
Absolutely. We personally haven't, because it would require being in a clinical setting where you had an IV in your arm and could take blood samples at intervals.
Right.
So we do have access to urine, being able to measure neurotransmitters in urine, but it's not such a quick turnaround. So if you had a shift in 15 minutes, it's not going to show up in the metabolites in the urine, the neurotransmitters. So you really have to take it from the blood. And we don't have the funding or the setup to actually have people hooked to IVs right now.
It's pretty extensive, isn't it?
It really, really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel that there is some aspect to that physiological change. The other piece, some people in other researchers in Brazil have been looking at melatonin and this connection with the pineal gland melatonin, and I'm forgetting the full name of the hormone, but the hormone that the pineal releases to see if they see differences from mediumistic channeling versus controls, and very small study, and they did not find any differences. But that's not to say there aren't. It was just a very small exploratory pilot study. So
Sure.
people are definitely continuing with that. What's been more interesting is the work with the quantum number generators, because we did a study in Mount Shasta where we had 5 trance channelers who did multiple sessions over like 3 days. And we had 16 quantum noise generators in the corner. Now, we call these QNGs. Some people call them RNGs. Basically, what they are is they spit out random noise. And there's really no reason for the data to be anything but random. So envision that you have a stream of data that's zeros and ones. Once you look at that whole data stream, you would end up with 50% zeros and 50% ones. That's what the random data stream would produce. And so you can see shifts in that data from various interventions. So we did this during our channeling sessions and non-channeling sessions, and we compared the data between the two. And what we found was that there was increased order. So it was less random when there was channeling versus no channeling. So this was really exciting to us, and I want to keep doing work on this. We haven't done it yet, but we have done it in energy medicine healing sessions, which is a type of channeling, I think.
Absolutely.
And during the healing sessions, again, it was more ordered. The data was less random. So this is really fascinating. We actually created a device that has a bunch of these on a panel, and it was just used in a biofield detection study to see if we could see shifts in that array of these devices based on changes in the biofield. So, and that, brings up this thing about, well, why are those changing, but we aren't seeing like the physiology changing? And I really think it's about this notion that's really gaining popularity, that everything is essentially information, and that these devices that are essentially information machines are being affected by the shifts in the information in the environment. And that Mount Shasta study was so validating for me, because I can personally feel in the room, in my body, if we're channeling or not. Like, it's a very clear, visceral experience. And so to have this objective device say, yeah, there's something different when they're channeling versus not channeling, was pretty exciting. So we have yet to follow up on that. I think that's going to be a really fruitful area of research.
Oh, absolutely. I am excited to hear more about that. Do you write about that in the Science of Channeling book?
Yes, absolutely. I have a whole section describing that. And, the Science of Channeling book is really written for the general lay person. It takes all these scientific concepts and makes them very, very accessible as I go through all these different studies.
Wonderful. Yeah, because this is really the research angle, the quantum and the psi stuff. And it's like, if you're interested in that, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of great information. And I love that you cover that in your book at a layman's level. That's perfect.
Yeah,
Because it really
absolutely.
is fascinating. And there is a way that the science and the research in marriage with the experiential, it's so validating. It's nice to have both, and
Absolutely.
it's exciting to see where they converse.
Absolutely. At IONS, we call that the noetic handshake. It's handshake between direct experience and the science, because someone can have a direct experience totally out of context and be really frightened by it and feel alone and not have any context for what they're experiencing. On the other hand, I could be talking till I'm blue in the face about all the studies to someone, but if they haven't had any sort of experience to ground that, it just kind of goes over their head. So the best synergy of this direct experience and science, I think, is the most impactful way for people to understand what's going on.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for writing your book. I'm so excited to read it. Um,
Absolutely.
I want to touch on something. I'm going to backtrack to an earlier deep dive we did, but I want to make sure we talk about this before we close today. And that is you were talking about the nature of how everybody's different and everybody's experience in channeling is different. And could we talk a little bit about like a negative experience in channeling, or when somebody when there is, like you talked about, the stimulation where there's like a fight or flight response in the body when they go into a channeling experience. And I know for me and for many of people, clients throughout the years that I've worked with, I found that my job has really been to help them feel safe and in ownership of these experiential, shifts in their body as the link is made, or as spiritual connection is happening. because of trauma in their past, right? And so there's a way that pleasure and pain can actually, right, catalyze the same cascade of biochemistry in the brain. So it's like, is this pleasure? Is this pain? And you have to mentally decide which way you're going to go with it, or it's going to default to the original experience or event where you first had that cascade of chemicals in your body, right? So with channeling, I know that for me, I was terrified to channel. I was terrified because it felt like a violation, felt like something that wasn't me coming in that I couldn't control, which was bad memories for me, right? And so it took a lot of training for me. I mean, decades of resistance, um, which is really, and you can probably speak to this too, which can be really splitting in the psyche because number one, like I knew I was a full body channel and would see other channels but could not bring it forward into the world. I'm like, that's me. I can do that, but I couldn't name it even for myself because if I did own that and walk towards it, it would mean a complete life shift and suddenly all of this, coupled terror stuff was getting right opened up. So wherever you want to go
Absolutely.
with that.
Absolutely. There's so many things to share about that. From a research perspective, I will say that there have been a number of studies looking at the characteristics of people who channel, specifically who have mediumistic experiences. And there's a number of studies that show that people with childhood trauma or trauma in their background, that is predictive of them having more channeling experiences. And
Because of the dissociation.
dissociation, but you think about it evolutionarily. So if I'm, this is not to make light of this at all. So please, I hold this very dear. If I'm in a situation where, let's say, my father is very volatile and abusive to me, so my capacity to read my dad's emotions when he walks into the room is evolutionarily beneficial. So there is this heightening, not just of our five senses, but of all of our senses, including our channeling capacity, to be able to keep ourselves safe. So to me, it makes perfect sense that people who have had traumatic experiences in their childhood have more developed or have psi experiences more earlier in their lives. Now, so that's one piece. What you've described about, the fear that comes up, especially around full trance channeling, I've read about that in various anecdotal accounts and various experiences of people with channeling, but I don't know of any studies that have specifically looked at that. But from my own personal experience and from all the histories of people who have shared this, I think it's quite common. I remember as that 10-year-old in the seance room, I was like, oh my God, are they going to jump in me? Like,
Right.
this feeling of out of controlness, and that I'm going to be violated or it's not going to be consensual. And there are cases where it's not consensual. And, I don't want to scare people. It's not common, but it does happen. And so, I talk about this in my book, and I think that there's a number of ways to address it.
Mhm.
Number one is to set intention around, what you want your channeling experience to look like, that you are in control of the speed with which and the amount of information coming in or out, or the yes no of the connection with non-physical entities. That's so important to empower ourselves in that way. Number two is to do personal growth work around those traumas and to become very familiar with your ego mind, with your personality, with its patterns, its constructs, its archetypes, its motivations, that you become intimately aware of those ego mind factors that influence you, so that you can witness them, observe them, clear them if you can. And that, I think, really helps with that fear factor and increasing empowerment. And then the third thing that's coming to mind right now is to intend for a helper, a guide, a support system, a community like yourself, Maria, and the beautiful work that you're doing and the courses that you're teaching, to have a container. Oh, you're not alone. There are so many people who are experiencing this, who are teachers, and that there's no one right way to do it, and to trust your inner guide to bring you to the next best supporter for you, to guide you on your path. And just like when I was working with those combat vets with PTSD, teaching a meditation, sometimes they couldn't, I mean, they would basically meditate for 10 seconds and that's it. And it's fine. Start there. 10 seconds, then that would grow to 30 seconds, and just breathing into whatever discomfort comes, but feeling no sense of have to's or shoulds or forcing in any way at all. Mm-hmm. So I think this is such an important topic, and I could probably go on and on about it, but I'll just pause there for now.
Thank you. Thank you for touching on it. It does feel very important, because there's the light and dark, you know, the shadow and the illumination in these gifts, you know, like that every gift can be directed to, you know, service in the positive or self-service, because, you know, and when we look at it in indigenous cultures, you know, there's the sorcery and the medicine person and like the white witch and the wizard and the dark witch. And it's like, when you have access to power through your physical vessel and you start getting a taste of that, and then the entities start coming and promising things and what have you, and seducing you and coercing, you know, if you are an out of control medium or channel, or you haven't ever had a context for it, what are you going to do with those invitations? You know, if you've just been suffering in your life and they're offering you, like, well, and this happened to my dear friend who's passed on now, Lauren Smith, the Pomo medicine man from Kashaya Reservation in California. And he told me the whole story many times of being tempted as a young man before he initiated. You know, he's like, the devil would be in the back seat of the car just telling me, like, I'll give you money, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. And he was the only one on the reservation with a job, with a car, with cash. What did he do with that, right? He didn't actually go into self-service. He went and picked up the grandmothers and brought them to the grocery store and paid for their groceries and brought them back home. He was doing good with it, which was to the, you know, annoyance of the entity. But he ended up finally initiating with the elders from up north, who came down and said, it's you need to make a decision, you know, you need to make a decision. So there is like these two parts, and I know that I don't want to make it into this big dramatic thing, but for some of us it really is a big dramatic thing. Like, it really is like these moments of intensity. And for others, it can be just the subtle, like, learning how to just trust your deep inner wisdom and intuition, and saying yes to that. Like, we're all conduits.
Yes. You know, one of the greatest gifts that I find from channeling is discernment. I feel like channeling just absolutely strengthens our discernment muscle, and these other pieces that go along with developing our channeling ability of, you know, that I talked about clearing the ego mind, understanding your historical trauma, clearing all that stuff helps us be a clear channel and helps us discern. You know, some people will project their authority onto channels or onto channeled information. Oh, it was channeled. It must be right. I must follow through with this. It's like, no, 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 no.
Right, right.
No, we still practice discernment always, always, always practicing discernment. Is this in my highest and best? Is this going to support me? Do I resonate with this? Is this actionable? Is this going to harm me? Is this going to be of benefit? And we don't just throw our cognition to the wind. We still practice discernment about, like you mentioned, the invitations or the content that comes through. We don't just take it as face value, as truth. I think this is so, so important. And it's easy to do that projection of authority outside of ourselves. And so my path in supporting people in channeling is to reverse that and to really value their own innate inner wisdom, and that they have within themselves all that they need to be able to discern about what their highest and best next steps are.
I really see that you're bringing into the consciousness, field of for humanity. You're bringing into the consciousness field around channeling the middle way, with the marriage of the science and research with the experiential, this middle way where, on one hand, we can just kind of go into, giving our power away. And then we can also go into throwing it away and disempowering and devaluing and minimizing the gift or the information because it was channeled. It can't be accurate, or it's the only thing that's accurate, right? And then here's science saying, like, listen, like, here's proof that this is actually happening. And here's the experience growing the person to develop discernment. And then you have the two together, really like outputting these incredible results.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's a great way to think about it. Absolutely. And the world is really intense right now, and people are overwhelmed and they're struggling with decision making and they're stressed out. And we have this like fire hydrant of information coming at us, and it's hard to know what's true for us. So this is a very real experience for a lot of humanity right now. And I see channeling as a tool to support us to be in our true north, and knowing that that true north is different for everybody, and that we're all on our own individual path, and that path can shift and change. Just because you got a channeled message today that's really working for you doesn't mean it's going to be true forever. Right. You keep tuning in, you keep checking in. Is it working for me right now? Is it still working for me? And people often ask, well, how do you know if it's my mind or if I'm really channeling?
Right.
And I'm sure you get that all the time too. I mean, it can be quite nuanced, especially when you're beginning. And I often will share with people, well, just when you tune in and you get info, and it's actionable, then you follow it. And if you're banging your head against the wall and it's not working and it's a struggle, that's probably not the right way to go. Because most, clear channeled information, if you act on it, it's easeful, it's joyful, it's expansive. Opportunity and synchronicities show up for you, and your life just becomes filled with grace. I know it's happened for me, for so many people I've talked to. I imagine for you and so many of your students, it's like, it feels like a miracle. You're like, wow, my life. I mean, sometimes I feel a little bad because it's like my life is so easeful. I'm just easefully flowing through my day-to-day and my larger path because I'm tapped into that inner wisdom. And I'm far from perfect, but I feel really, I don't know, I couldn't live without these tools in my life, honestly.
I agree completely. I agree completely. And we do, you with your, your people and me with mine, just kind of like it's amazing to track over the years how their lives are changing, and just the influence of, we'll call it, these higher frequencies, these pure harmonic frequencies, more readily available in our lives and more like just more in our lives, and it's going to shift discord out, and that's what I've noticed for myself. Like I lean into the harmonics because I'm having this dose of it every time I channel, just like resetting. It's a reset every time I channel, right? And it's just, I even have resistance to channeling sometimes because my ego is like, no, I want to stay contracted, and I know that'll clear me. Like, really? Okay. But it's amazing. And part of that discernment for me in looking at the teachers, or especially spiritual teachers, are they walking their talk and channels, spiritual channels? Can I trust what they're bringing through? I kind of look at their life, their lifestyle, and their choices for their health and balance, and that helps me to kind of discern, like, are they working with their guides as a team, as friendship, as like a family, or are they kind of like severed, head to body and spirit matter, and the guides out there and me here, and and you can kind of gauge. I don't know. That's kind of like one of my gauges of accuracy, and like, can I trust what this person's bringing through? um, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me about, often I'll get question about, well, what is the source of channeling? Are there really, non-physical, multi-dimensional beings? Are there really deceased spirit people? Is it, Akashic record? Is it Psi reservoir? Am I just telepathically picking up? There's so many different theories about what the sources are. And so with my scientific hat on, we don't know. We don't have the tools today to definitively know what those sources are. Do I believe we will know at some point? Yes, I strongly believe at some point we'll have the tools to definitively show what the source, like let's say in trance channeling, we'll be able to definitively show what the sources are of trance channeling. But right now, scientifically, we can't definitively say yay or nay. Now, my invitation to people, because often people get so fixated on the source, and I've had numerous channeled messages that I've observed and that I've said myself, because people say, well, what's your name? And they'll say, why do you care so much about our name? It's not about our name. You don't need to know who this is. So you're laughing, and I'm sure you've experienced it too. It's like, it doesn't matter. And so my invitation is to not care so much about what the source is, but to be more about the content.
Right. Exactly. Listen to what
Content.
you're hearing and the frequency and how it's
Yeah.
moving your heart. Yeah.
Exactly. Is the content meaningful? Is it useful? Is it actionable for you in this moment right now?
Exactly. Beautiful. Um, there's one more thing I really wanted to touch on. I want to touch on noetic signature before we close. Okay. So this is one thing what would you say, before I say my thing, what would you say is, and this is just like, Helane, what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? Um, what do you think is, if the higher density helpers, like, what is their purpose for linking with us? Like, what are they after? What is their goal? Why, it's like we're trying to learn what it is for us as human beings in this physical form while we're in our physical form. Like, wow, check this thing out. This is a cool contraption technology here. Look what we can do. But for them, like, what do you think? what do you think they're doing when they are linking to us in physical form? What are they, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So I can speak to that from, personal Helene, having sat through, I don't know how many thousands of channeled sessions. And the common theme is they are invested in supporting humanity to wake up. And the way that they're doing that is by bringing forth these frequencies, these messages in so many different formats so that people can hear it and wake up. Wake up, what do I mean by that? Waking up to our true nature, that we're not just this body, we're not separate, we're all interconnected, our consciousness goes beyond our body. So that is kind of like the higher level overall theme. Then some supposed beings come through and they're like so excited because just as we're excited to try trance channeling, they're excited to try it from their end, to be in a physical body. And they're like, wow, this is so cool. You can't normally see me, but now I can actually talk to you. And this is incredible.
Yeah.
So that's my sense. And that, it is a artificial veil that we are actually separate, and it is a tool for us to remove the veil and for humanity start understanding we're not separate, we're not alone, we are so much more than we think we are. And I'm really looking forward to what the future is going to look like as that veil continues to diminish.
Yes. Oh my goodness, it's so exciting. I remember meeting, and when we were in Tulum one year, we met an Arcturian team that were nearby and linked with me. And they're like, this is our first experience linking to a human being. And you could tell they were like giddy and like, am I doing it right? And they're very technical about it. It was the first time I and they had been assigned to us and they wanted, it was very interesting. I'd never had that experience before. uh,
Yeah, I've seen that with my mom quite a bit. It's really quite fascinating. Yeah.
so let's close this with more about the noetic signature. You write about it in your book. This is a wonderful way for people to gauge their ability, their gift, and anybody can kind of go through this list. Can you tell us more about why you're so excited about this noetic signature?
Yes, yes, I am so excited about it. When I first started at IONS and started learning about parapsychology, there were just all these terms, and my head was spinning with the terms because everybody had a different definition. So are you a medium, or are you a channeler, or are you a psychic, or do you have ESP, or do you have clairaudience or clairvoyance? And I could go on and on about all the different terms that are applied to this experience that I'm calling channeling. And I said, you know what? I know this sounds crazy, but I'm just going to scratch all of that and start over again. And so we started with collecting stories from over 500 people about their experience of accessing information and energy from beyond their five senses. And we collected all these beautiful stories. And then we did a qualitative analysis of it and pulled out all these themes. There were like 350 themes and sub-themes. And we created questions connected to those themes. Then we narrowed all those questions down to about 175, and we administered that to over 1,000 people. And then we ran it through our statistics to pull out, again, themes, characteristics, if you will, that explained the variation in the people's experiences. And what we ended up with was a 44-item questionnaire that represented 12 characteristics of how people express their unique channeling ability. And what was fascinating is it did essentially line up on some of the more historical terms. Like the biggest one was just general intuition. And I don't want to say just because it's so powerful and important, but this idea of I just know it, or I just feel it, or, I have a gut feeling. So that was the biggest one. Then we have mind to mind communication. We have trance-channeling and mediumship was another one. What was fascinating is there were a number of them related to the body. One was like the goosebumps that I guess get goosebumps. That was a whole one in and of itself. There was another one where it was actually feeling people's physical sensations. So if someone has a headache and I walk in the room, I get a headache. So that was a whole separate characteristic. Mm-hmm. Another one related to that was being able to hold an object in your hand and get information from it, which is quite fascinating. Knowing things from dreams was a separate one. And then healing was another one. Mm-hmm. And then another one that was really quite fascinating was around intention and visualization. And what was interesting about that is there were two aspects of it. One was using intention to affect the physical world, but also using intention to know things about the world, like remote viewing. So both of those were in the same characteristic, which I thought was so fascinating. And, we basically let the data guide our, the data brought the result out. So that was fascinating to think about those two, potentially very different looking things that being different aspects of the same concept. Anyway, I could go on and on about that because I love this topic, but people can take this questionnaire. They see what their scores are on the 12 characteristics. They get to learn about themselves, and it offers them a tool to explore these various pieces. And we do still have the study open right now, so people can take that inventory if they'd like to. Maybe we can put the link for that for people. And my big highlight around this is normalize it, to remind people there is huge variation, that one type is not better than another type, that they're all beautiful and unique and wonderful in and of themselves. And let's support people to explore them as a tool of empowerment.
Absolutely. How wonderful. That's so exciting. As you listed these things, in my first level 1 of holistic channeling, we go through a list, and like everything you said is on my list, but different languaging. And you probably have more than I do on your points, your signatures. So I'm excited I'll share my list with you, and I want to learn more about your noetic signatures and start to use that with my students. It's just so valuable. And thank you for doing all the work you did to come up with this. It's just like another step on this journey of, of our journey of channeling and normalizing and removing the fear veils and everything from it, and helping people to reclaim their sixth sensibilities, So thank you for all that you're doing. And I'd love to have you just share about your book. Where can people get your book? And can you talk about what has birthed from the publishing of your book? I know you're going to teach a course on your book.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's so wonderful to connect with you about these topics. It's just a pleasure. And the book is called The Science of Channeling, and it's available on Amazon, on bookshop.org, on Audible as an audiobook, pretty easy to find. And yes, I've taken the book and created it into a course. And so this course is co-hosted with the Shift Network. It's going to start in March, and it's 7 modules. Each module goes into these research questions that we asked about channeling and goes very in depth into the details of that, so people can really understand it and feel armed with all this information to support them. It will also include a half-hour experiential where I guide people through channeling, strengthening exercises, and also a half-hour Q&A. And there's lots of bonus modules and all this really fun stuff. So I hope you'll be able to join us. You can go to the IONS website at noetic, noetic.org, where we'll have postings about that course, and there's also links to get the book there as well. And Maria mentioned my previous book. Also, the previous book I wrote with my mother, who is a trance channeler, and it's actually a beautiful memoir of her life story and how she came into her channeling, how that affected how she raised me, and then my whole experience with channeling as a tool for empowerment as a woman in a Middle Eastern family. So it was really, it's a sweet story if anyone
Free
feels
to be me.
with that. Free to be me. Yes.
Yeah, I highly recommend that book. It's so heartwarming and so empowering. You're right. It is very empowering for women.
And healing through generations, this
Yeah.
whole idea of ancestral healing, that we have made this commitment to heal our past traumas of our entire line, come to this, fully awake, aware, empowered state is just so profound.
It is profound. I'd love to have you on again when you have a moment in your schedule to just go into ancestors and the lineage and the mediumship aspect. That would be a really rich interview as well.
Absolutely. I will say, and maybe you can comment on this too before we head out. I am finding that this work is much easier and simpler than it has ever been. So you think, oh, this idea of healing my ancestral lines, like, oh my God, that could feel so overwhelming. And yet it feels like things are shifting
Yes,
just
yes, yes.
so.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I mean, we could talk about that forever as well. We have so much support right now. We have so much support. It's just like completely all the prophecies are like culminating to this moment. We have the magnetic pole shift. We have like all the solar activity. Everything is really to our benefit right now to make this consciousness leap and to let the veils drop and to have it be from a sovereign place of directing it in ourselves, of like, let it be gentle. Like, I choose this healing process, with ease and grace, and it doesn't have to be trauma drama anymore. We can really like surrender and be carried by this current of consciousness that is our true nature. And yeah, I mean, this is the time, right? This is the time. It's so great.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I hope we've inspired your audience in some way and that they've really,
Yes, yes. Thank
yes.
you so much, Helane. And I want to invite everybody who is considering, jumping on board with the holistic channeling courses coming up in April and May to really consider doing Helane's course in the Shift Network, The Science of Channeling, before you get to holistic channeling, which is mine is way more experiential, and very like self-inquiry, really doing the inner work. Like, we're a community and we're deep diving and getting juicy. And so, oh my gosh, like the science of channeling is the perfect segue. It's the perfect complement to holistic channeling. So I very highly recommend you go to noetic.org. And is it really obvious on the homepage how to sign up for that? You'd go to the Shift Network, perhaps, link.
The Shift Network link. Yes, they're going to start marketing it pretty heavily. So it will be obvious.
Okay, great. So noetic.org, and look for the science of channeling and Helane's work. You can also I highly recommend finding out more about the Parapsychological Association. And how can people find out more about your work with them?
Yes, you can go to parapsych.org. It is a wonderful resource for parapsychology, learning about what parapsychology is, the various conventions, memberships. They have memberships at multiple different levels. They have public offerings and symposia. It's a wonderful community to dive into if you want to learn more about the science of channeling as well.
Great. And they're international or
Yes, international.
an international community. It's so exciting. So thank you so much, Helene, for your beautiful presence and all of your wisdom and all of your skill and knowledge, and for taking the time today to drop in and bless us with like this really fascinating and inspiring conversation.
Such a pleasure to be with you. It's just lovely. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Aloha. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.